All right, everybody. So for Tuesday, a week from today. Wow. Crazy times. All right, so a week from today, I'd like you to read pages 291 through 295. That deals with the switch statement. I think you'll like the switch statement. It's actually very easy. And then Thursday, 302 through 311, we're going to skip forward a little bit. We're going to skip over the do while loop. It's very similar to a while loop and a for loop. It's something we've seen before. And then Friday will be quiz 3. That will cover looping, the while loop and that kind of thing. And that will then lead up to test 3, which will cover everything through chapter 7. Okay? Any questions over what's coming up next couple of days? All right. Okay, so who can tell me, when we're doing a loop, when you're creating a loop, what kinds of things do you need to have a successful loop? When you're creating a successful loop, something that does something over and over again. What's that?
You need a prompt.
Actually,
you're going to need information.
You are going to need information. We've done loops, in fact, where we haven't had any prompts at all. Our very first one, where we created that table, that multiplication table. So what kinds of things do you need to set up for a successful loop? A counter. Typically, you're going to have a counter. And specifically with that counter, what do we do? What do we have to do with what's the very first thing we have to do with that counter? That's right. We need to initialize that counter. We need to set it equal to a 0, 1. Okay, what else do we need to do with that counter in order to have a successful loop? Yeah, typically we're either going to increment it or decrement it or change it in some way. Okay, so the counter needs to be changed. Okay, you've got to be able to change that counter. And then, what's the last piece that you're going to need in order to ensure a successful loop? What's that?
That's close, correct.
That's true. You do need brackets around that. That's a good point. You need to have brackets. What's one good piece? When do you know when you're finished? Stephanie?
You need something to tell you when the loop stops.
That's right. You need some sort of a condition to tell you that the loop stops. Okay, so for a loop to be successful, you have to do all of these things. You need a counter, and that counter needs to be initialized to some initial value, typically a 0 or a 1. You need to have the counter needs to be changed so that it will eventually reach that condition where you know you need to stop, and you need to have brackets around the particular piece of code that you want to have to do something. Now, let's take a look at an example. Okay, so this particular example here is something called the compound interest statement. This is something that you use quite a bit in financial computations, whether or not someone puts money into a bank and earns compound interest on it, or if you're making a loan payment and you want to pay compound interest on that. Okay, so for instance, enter the principal of the investment. So this is the original amount of money that you put in for principal. Let's say, for instance, a nice modest certificate of deposit, $4,500. Okay, and let's say, for instance, we want to talk about the rate of return on the investment. A nice typical rate of return, let's say, for instance, the T-bill, Treasury bill, just the other night is returning 3.5%. Okay, and the number of times per year that interest is paid. Typically, they pay that 4 times a year. Okay, so if you were to put in a 10-year Treasury bill or 10-year T-bill, you could see that for each year, you're making more and more money on that deposit. And so, at the end of the 10th year, you will have made, the entire investment would be worth $6,067 for a nice tidy profit of a little more than $1,500. Okay, so this is just interest